There's a small group of people inside every company who get promoted without ever appearing to push for it. They don't corner their managers in hallways. They don't send carefully worded emails asking for clarity on their career path. They don't show up at performance reviews with the energy of someone making a case. They just seem to move up. The promotions come, the titles change, the responsibilities expand, and the people watching from the outside can't quite explain how it keeps happening to them. It looks like luck. It isn't. It's a set of habits that, together, produce a perception inside the company that the person is already operating at the next level. The promotion, when it comes, doesn't feel like a reward, so much as a formal acknowledgement of something everyone has already concluded. These habits aren't secret exactly. They aren't hidden, they just don't get talked about much. Because the people who practice them rarely articulate them, and the people who don't practice them rarely recognize what they're looking at. The habits are subtle, and they accumulate slowly, which is why the people who do them well often get misread as naturally talented, when really they're just doing things almost anyone could do, but most people don't. Here are 10 of them. Not in any particular order. They work as a system rather than a list. And the people who get promoted without asking tend to do most of them at once, in a way that reads as effortless from the outside, but reflects fairly deliberate behavior on the inside. They treat their current role as already too small for them without ever saying so. They don't complain that their responsibilities are limited. They don't push back on assignments as beneath them. They just behave in the day-to-day as if they were already a level up. They take on questions that fall outside their stated scope. They think about the implications of their work for parts of the business they aren't technically responsible for. They write internal emails and put together materials with the kind of polish you'd expect from someone 2 levels up. The behavior is consistent and quiet. Over time, the people around them stop seeing them as someone in their current role and start seeing them as someone who happens to currently sit in it, which is a different perception entirely. When the promotion comes, it's really just a correction of the gap between the role and the perception. They make their manager's job easier in ways the manager notices, but doesn't have to acknowledge. They don't announce the favors or remind the manager of what they've done. They notice what the manager's dealing with, find ways to absorb some of it, and do those things without being asked. The manager experiences it as a kind of relief they can't quite trace, but they associate the relief with the person providing it. Managers don't tend to promote people they have to manage closely. They promote people who reduce the cognitive load of managing them. The employees who get promoted without asking seem to know this in their bones, and a real chunk of their effort, often invisibly, goes into reducing their manager's workload rather than just performing their own. They have opinions about things that aren't technically their problem. Most employees stay carefully inside the boundaries of their assigned work. They don't weigh in on things outside their function. They treat the edges of the role as the edges of their thinking. The people who get promoted do the opposite. They form views on the broader business. They notice what's happening in adjacent teams. They raise questions, sometimes privately, about decisions being made elsewhere. These views get offered carefully in the right context, without overstepping, but they get offered. And over time, the cumulative effect is that the person reads as someone who thinks at a level above their role, which is exactly the perception that tends to precede a promotion. They're unusually careful about the quality of small things. Most people focus their attention on the big deliverables, the major projects, the things that'll get evaluated formally. The people who get promoted bring the same level of care to the small stuff, the way an internal email is written, the clarity of a quick update in a meeting, the 5-minute hallway conversation. Those small moments are where most of a person's reputation actually gets built, because they're the moments other people experience most often. Someone whose small communications are clear and considered ends up with a reputation for being clear and considered that compounds across hundreds of interactions. Someone whose small communications are sloppy builds the opposite reputation just as steadily. Even if their big deliverables are good, they're known by the right people without doing anything that looks like networking. The employees who get promoted have somehow been visible to people senior to their direct manager. They've presented in a meeting where someone 2 levels up was watching. They've been pulled into a project that crossed functional boundaries. They've been mentioned by someone influential in a context that wasn't directly about them. None of this is the product of aggressive networking. It's the byproduct of doing visible work in visible places with people who happen to be senior. The visibility doesn't have to be high stakes or formal. It just has to exist. People who are completely invisible to anyone outside their immediate team, no matter how good their work is, almost never get promoted because the decision makers can't picture them in the next role. They show emotional steadiness in the moments that rattle other people. Workplaces have predictable spikes, a project goes sideways, a key person quits, a reorg gets announced. A client conversation goes badly. In those moments, most employees show some visible version of the stress they're feeling, a little more tense, more reactive, more defensive. The people who get promoted are the ones who don't. They handle the hard moment the same way they handle a normal one. It isn't a performance of calm. It's genuine composure, which, unfortunately for the people trying to fake it, is harder to fake than they realize. Composed people get read as ready for more responsibility. Because more responsibility means more of those moments, and the company is making a bet about who can absorb them. They make their work legible without ever sounding self-promotional. There's a narrow band between leaving your work invisible and oversharing in a way that reads as performative, and most people miss it in one direction or the other. The employees who get promoted tend to live in that narrow band. They give clear, brief, factual updates. They mention their contributions when it's relevant and don't dwell on them. They make their work understandable to others without making it the center of every conversation. Legibility matters more than volume. When other people understand what you're doing, you don't have to advertise it. The work does the advertising. They invest in relationships that have no immediate payoff. When people get busy, most of them get transactional about who they keep up with. They invest in connections that are useful to them right now. The employees who get promoted tend to keep a much broader set of relationships alive, including ones with no obvious near-term utility. They check in with people they used to work with. They take coffees with people who aren't in a position to do anything for them. They reply to the messages that aren't urgent. The accumulated effect over years is a network of people across the company who think well of them, know what they do, and are at any given moment potential supporters when their name comes up. Most of those supporters never get explicitly asked for anything. They're just there in the background of the picture other people form. They're unusually open about what they're not good at. Most people in professional settings spend energy obscuring their weaknesses. They avoid situations that would expose gaps. They downplay what they don't know. The people who get promoted tend to do the opposite. They'll name a weakness openly, often in a way that disarms any attempt to use it against them. I'm not the best at this kind of analysis. Can someone double check my work? This isn't my strongest area. I want to make sure I'm thinking about it the right way. Counterintuitively, this builds trust faster than any display of strength would because it signals accurate self-knowledge and a person who isn't threatened by their own limits. People who are honest about their weaknesses tend to read as confident. People who try to hide them tend to read as insecure, even when their work is strong. They treat the job as an apprenticeship rather than a destination. The people who get promoted view their current role as a stage in a longer process of learning, not the place where they've arrived. They stay curious about how the company works at levels above their own. They pay attention to the senior people and study how they operate. They ask questions in the right moments about how decisions actually get made. They treat their daily work as raw material for the next phase, rather than the entire point of their employment. That orientation shows up as a particular kind of presence in meetings, engaged with something larger than the immediate task, learning even while working. People read it accurately as readiness for what comes next. What ties all of this together is something most people don't articulate, but it's the engine underneath. The habits all reflect a particular relationship to the company and the work. The people who get promoted without asking treat their employment as a long-term professional engagement, where they're slowly building competence, relationships, and a reputation, not as a series of discrete tasks that get completed and forgotten. The long-term frame shapes the small choices. It's why they keep up with people who aren't immediately useful. It's why they care about the small things, take on questions outside their formal role, and stay composed when other people don't. The habits are downstream of the frame, and the frame is what most people are missing. That's also why none of this can really be faked. You can't perform a long-term orientation in order to get promoted faster. The performance shows. The genuine version, the one that produces the promotion, only comes from actually thinking about your career in long arcs and treating the daily work as the place those arcs get built. People who think this way do the habits without having to think about each one. People who don't think this way struggle to maintain them because the habits demand a kind of patience and consistency. That only makes sense if you're operating on a longer timeline than the next quarter. If there's good news in any of this, it's that the orientation isn't a fixed personality trait. It's a way of relating to your work that develops. When you start treating your career as something you're slowly building, rather than something happening to you, the habits follow from there and the promotions follow from the habits. The whole thing works the way it works because the company is watching patterns over time, and patterns are what get rewarded, not individual moments. People who try to win the moments without building the patterns rarely get promoted, no matter how hard they work. People who build the patterns rarely have to ask. By the time the conversation happens, the conclusion has already been reached, quietly, across dozens of small observations by the people who will eventually make the call.